The bus driver was a man most people hardly noticed. Each morning, he rose before the sun, dressed in his neatly pressed uniform, and carried himself to the depot with a quiet rhythm that never faltered. He was in his 50s, his hair thinning, his shoulders a little stooped from years of leaning over the wheel. His passengers came and went without much thought, their eyes on their phones, their minds on their own lives. To them, he was part of the scenery, just the man who made the bus move forward. There were days when that thought weighed heavily on him. He wondered if his life amounted to anything beyond the endless stops and the hum of the engine. The world rushed past him, and yet he remained fixed in his seat, delivering people from one place to another while never quite feeling like he was going anywhere himself. Invisible, that was the word he carried quietly in his heart, but tucked within his memories was the voice of his late wife, gentle and steady, always reminding him that meaning was not measured in applause or recognition. She would tell him, worth is often found in the moments no one notices. When you choose patience, when you choose care. Those words lingered like a small lantern in the dark corners of his thoughts, though at times the light seemed faint against the weight of his doubts. The children who sometimes rode his bus laughed too loud, the office workers sighed impatiently, and the elderly shuffled slowly down the aisle. He carried them all without complaint, though rarely did anyone look him in the eye. Sometimes, when the bus emptied and the silence was heavy, he found himself whispering those words from his wife, as if to remind himself that maybe, just maybe, there was something more in the smallness of his role. His life outside the bus was equally quiet. He lived alone in a modest home, his evenings filled with the sound of the radio and the memory of a voice that no longer answered back. Yet every morning, he returned to his seat, hands steady on the wheel, guiding strangers through their days. Routine held him steady, but inside, there was an ache for proof that his life mattered, that he was not merely invisible in the rush of the world. He did not know then that one stormy evening would bring the answer. The storm arrived without mercy. By late afternoon, dark clouds pressed down on the city, and rain poured so heavily it blurred the world outside the windshield. The bus rattled against the wind, wipers straining to keep pace. Inside, passengers grew restless, clutching their coats and bags, eager to escape into the night. Every stop was a flurry of wet shoes and hurried steps, each person desperate to reach shelter. The driver remained steady, his hands firm on the wheel. He had driven through storms before, but something about this one felt heavier, the air thick with unease. At the final stop, most passengers rushed out without a word, disappearing into the sheets of rain. The bus grew empty, the only sound the thrum of the storm against the windows. He reached for the switch to close the doors when he noticed her. An elderly woman sat near the middle, her hands trembling as she gathered her belongings. The storm had slowed her movements. Her umbrella refused to snap open, and her frail arms seemed to fight against the weight of her own coat. She tried to rise, but the motion left her unsteady, gripping the seat for balance. Everyone else had gone. No one had waited. The driver paused. He could have turned off the ignition, stepped outside, and hurried her along. Instead, he stayed seated, watching with quiet patience. Something stirred within him, his wife's words, echoing like a whisper. Worth is often found in the moments no one notices. So he waited. He waited as she fumbled with her bag. He waited as she shuffled carefully down the aisle. He waited as her fragile hands clutched the railing, her steps painfully slow against the swaying bus. The storm roared louder outside, but inside, time seemed to still. His role, so often invisible, suddenly felt vital. When she finally reached the door, she looked up at him, her eyes weary but grateful. He nodded gently, offering the kind of reassurance words could not hold. She stepped carefully into the storm, her umbrella at last open, her figure small against the night. He did not close the doors immediately. Instead, he watched her move slowly toward the safety of the nearby lights, making sure she was truly steady before the bus pulled away. In that quiet pause, his heart shifted. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his presence, not as invisible, but as necessary. He had waited, and in that waiting, something unseen yet powerful had unfolded. The bus sat idling at the curb, rain still hammering the roof like an unending drum. The driver leaned back slightly in his seat, watching through the blur of water as the elderly woman disappeared into the glow of a nearby doorway. Only then did he allow himself to breathe deeply. His hands, still resting on the wheel, felt heavier than before. As if holding more than just the steering column, they held the weight of choice, the weight of waiting. He thought of how easily he could have hurried her along, how quickly he could have closed the doors and ended his shift. No one would have questioned him, no one would have even known. But by waiting, he had given her something more than time. He had given her dignity, he had given her safety. And in that space between action and stillness, he realized his role had never been about simply driving a bus. It had been about carrying people through their most vulnerable moments, even if they never noticed. The memory of his wife's words returned, stronger now, no longer a faint echo but a clear truth. Worth is often found in the moments no one notices. He understood now that she had been preparing him for this kind of quiet heroism, the kind that lives in shadows, the kind that never seeks applause. As he guided the empty bus back through the rain-soaked streets, something inside him softened. He no longer felt invisible. The small act of waiting had reminded him that even lives built on routine can hold extraordinary weight. He imagined how many times before he had offered the same kind of unnoticed kindness. A slowed stop for someone running late, a steady hand when the road was rough, the patience to let someone find their footing before moving forward. He saw now that these small choices, repeated across years, shaped a life of quiet service. By the time he parked the bus for the night, the storm was beginning to ease. The city still glistened with rain, but inside him, there was a calm he had not known in years. He stepped off the bus and walked toward the depot with a faint smile, not the smile of someone who had been praised or rewarded, but the smile of a man who finally knew his worth. And perhaps that was the greatest gift of all, that, in waiting for someone else's safety, he had found his own meaning. The bus driver who waited reminds us that dignity and kindness are not found in grand gestures, but in the stillness of moments where no one else is watching. His patience became more than an act of courtesy, it became a reminder that every person holds the power to protect, to comfort, and to make another's world just a little safer. May we all carry this lesson, choosing care even when unnoticed. If this story touched you, consider liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing for more stories that warm the heart.